Welcome to Mana TV and TV5, and welcome to the show Insight with Praveen Puram. Today, our esteemed guest is Mr. Chris Harvey, and he is our election director of Georgia, and the hot topic is presidential elections. So we thought through this show, we wanted Chris to update more what's going on the Georgia elections and how the arrangements are, how the voters are doing their voting. We just wanted to know more about him. So before going into the details, I just wanted to introduce Chris Harvey. Thank you, Chris, for coming on to the show. Chris Harvey is the state elections director for the Office of Secretary of State of Georgia. Chris grew up and still lives in DeKalb County. After graduating from the Citadel with a degree in political science, he taught high school for a few years, becoming a DeKalb County police officer. He spent 13 years in law enforcement in DeKalb and Fulton counties before becoming the chief investigator for the Secretary of State office in 2007, where he primarily worked on election-related cases. In 2015, the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, our governor, appointed Chris as the state election director. As director of elections division, he is responsible for working closely with the county election officials to ensure secure and legal actions take place in Georgia. He shares legal updates, procedural and rule changes, security updates, and other information with county election officials to assist in their conducting elections. Chris lives in Decatur with his wife Kathy and their 4 children. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on to the show. And all the viewers are excited to know more about the elections and how are the arrangements and what is the trend going on there inside.
Yeah, thank you, Praveen. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm joining you from my home in Decatur, and happy to be talking about elections in Georgia. This has been a very unusual year in elections in Georgia, and in most things in Georgia. We've got a couple things going on. We've got a brand new voting system that we're deploying this year. The first time in about 17 or 18 years that everybody voting in Georgia will actually have a paper ballot. From 2002 to 2020, Georgians voted on 100% electronic machines. And as concerns grew about hacking and interference, they said, we got to have some paper to back it up. So we spent most of last year reviewing voting systems and getting a voting system selected and installed and trained. And then this year we thought, well, we'll just do elections. Well, nobody counted on coronavirus and everything else. So it's really been a challenge, but the county election offices have risen to the challenge. They've done a tremendous job. And so we're seeing record-breaking turnout in this presidential election. I'll be happy to go over some of the numbers with you if you'd like, and the different ways people vote. But we've had advance voting going since the 12th of October, and we have almost had as many people vote during the advance voting as we had vote in the entire election in 2016.
Wow.
So, and we've still got 2 more days of advance voting and election day to go. In 2016, there were just over 3.9 million ballots cast in the presidential election. And this morning, we were up over about 3.1 million cast just during advance voting. So we're gonna get really close to breaking the overall record by Friday afternoon.
What do you think this drastic changes, Chris? Because if you compare 2016 and 2020, you already said 3.9 million overall, and now it's already 3.1, still 2 days left for advance voting. Mm-hmm. So what do you think this changed in this COVID situation?
Well, a couple things. I think more than anything else, it's the political landscape. I think there's so much interest and so much energy on both sides, on all sides, really. The people, whoever you talk to, they've got their favorite, and they will, go to the mat for him and their side. And so I think 2016 was a really big surprise in the fact that so many people thought it was going to go one way and it went the other way. And I think it really sort of awakened a lot of people to realize, hey, nobody can take anything for granted. Just because somebody, quote unquote, should win doesn't mean they will win. And so people realize if they don't get involved, they're taking a chance that they may not end up with something that they like. And I don't care professionally who wins. Professionally, I want to make sure that the process works. But I'm happy to see people involved, and I'm happy to see people take advantage of the system. And I'm also really happy and really pleased that everything is going so smoothly.
That's wonderful to hear, Chris. So can we get more insight on how many counties and what is the voter number in Georgia
Sure.
for this election?
Yeah, of course, Georgia has 159 counties, and that's the second highest number of counties of any state in the United States. Only Texas has more. And clearly, Georgia is not the second largest state in the US. So we just like to carve our counties up really small. Georgia also has a uniform voting system, which means that every county votes with the exact same system, with the exact same machines, with the exact same procedures. So if you happen to live in downtown Atlanta, in a very urban area, you're going to vote the same way if you live on a peanut farm in South Georgia with the same equipment. And I think that's really important and helpful. It really it levels out the playing field so that you don't have to say, well, these people that have extra resources, they get a better way to vote than these other folks. The fact is, we provide one way that's a good way for everyone to vote, and I think that works well. I also want to point out for your viewers that all elections are really done at the county level. All the absentee ballots are issued by the county. They're counted by the county. The voter registration is done by the county. It's maintained by the county. So if anyone encounters a difficulty voting, while the Secretary of State sort of has large oversight over the entire process, it's really going to be your county elections office that's going to be able to solve your problem. I don't count any votes myself. I don't mail out ballots. I don't do those kinds of things. Your county is going to do it. So if you have a problem, make sure you contact your county. But as I said before, the county election officials have really risen to the challenge. And, they didn't have the option when COVID hit. The legislature went home and I went home. The Secretary of State's people went home, but the county officials couldn't go home. They had to stay in their offices, and they had to get the equipment ready, and they had to train their poll workers, and they had to get absentee ballot applications processed, and they had to do all that stuff. And so they stayed at a pretty significant risk to themselves. So I'm really proud of the way the counties have survived this year.
Hats off to all the workers who have been during this COVID taking the responsibility on the ballots. So let's listen from you more, Chris, on absent ballots. This is a very unusual situation that we have number of ballots asking. So can you throw some light on how many absent ballots have been registered so far, and
Sure.
versus the on-premises in-person voting?
Right. Before this year, generally the total number of absentee ballots, and when I say absentee, I mean by mail ballots, that in Georgia, anybody is eligible to get a mail ballot. You don't need a reason. You don't need any excuse. You just ask for one and you're able to get one. And historically, absentee ballots have made up between 5 and 7% of the votes. Well, in 2020, just in this election, for example, absentee ballots are a third of the votes that have been cast so far. Wow. So there have been over 1 million absentee ballots that have been accepted back in. There are another 600,000 or 700,000 that haven't been returned yet. So we could have as many as 1.5 million absentee ballots cast, which is, again, I don't have the exact number, but I think in 2016 there were fewer than 100,000 absentee ballots cast in the whole state. So now we're up over 1 million with another 2 or 3 days to go. People have really taken advantage of it, and for people that have a health compromise or difficulty getting around, it really is a good way to vote. I voted with an absentee ballot by mail myself. I put it in a Dropbox, but it's convenient. They mailed it to my house. I had plenty of time to sit down and go over it and fill it out. I put it in a Dropbox on the Decatur Square, and about 36 hours later, I got a text from the DeKalb County office saying, "We've received your absentee ballot. It's good to go." And, I was done. And that was about 2 weeks ago. So wow. I really recommend it for people that have those limitations or just don't want to go to a polling place.
Wow, Chris, I think if you see the real numbers, there are 10 times more
Yes.
is absentee ballots. If you compare to 2016, it is 147,000. Now it is like more than a million. As you said, more 600, 700,000 to be yet to be counted. Yeah. So so far, have you seen any unusual activities near the ballots, or any unusual discussions going on, or everything is smooth? Any information on that aspect?
Yeah, it's been a remarkably smooth election. Now, I will say, for the first day or two of advanced voting, um, the system that the counties use to issue ballots during advanced voting was working a little bit slowly, and that's something that the Secretary of State's office operates. And so it took us a day or two to kind of work the kinks out of that so that everybody could get full access. But since we've done that, it's been humming along like a well-oiled machine. It hasn't slowed anybody down. What I've seen just anecdotally is most people are, voting even in DeKalb and Fulton counties in 5 and 10 minutes. I mean, they're going in, they're voting, and they're back out in 5 or 10 minutes. And so we're really pleased to see that. We have, security has always been on our mind, and it's something that we focus a lot on. And it's one of those things that, as long as you spend a lot of time and energy on it, and then you hope that you never have to use it. And by doing that, you're preventing the crises that you'll have. So we spent a lot of time and energy keeping our cyber defenses up. We've worked with federal Department of Homeland Security, FBI, CISA, all these different groups to be aware of threats. We're aware that there are forces out there that want to interfere, want to disrupt elections. And we keep the counties aware of those kinds of threats. I put out something today alerting counties to some federal concerns about cybersecurity. So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that people don't see. But fortunately, we've been able to keep all that stuff out, and people's voting has been a pretty positive experience.
Thank you so much, Chris. And let's talk about the COVID. How is the COVID guidelines happening at the ballots? Is there any special instructions for the people and also the employees?
That's an interesting question, because the right to vote is a fundamental constitutional right, and you really can't mess with that very much. You can't put a lot of conditions on that. So with COVID, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. For the most part, those decisions are made at the county level. Now, in some cases, there are local ordinances or there are local judicial orders in place that require everybody, for example, everybody coming into a courthouse has to wear a mask. If that's where the voting is taking place, then people have to wear a mask to go into the courthouse. If they don't have some of those mandates in place, then the counties can't force people to do something extra in order to vote. So it's a little bit of a give and take, and it depends a little bit on where you vote. The Center for Disease Control has put out some guidelines for polling places during COVID, and it emphasizes the things you would expect, keeping appropriate distances, using masks, sanitizing surfaces, minimizing contact, putting barriers up between people, those kinds of things. And so we've done all that stuff with the counties. And again, every polling place is a little bit different. Some have a lot of space so you can spread out. Some of them are a lot tighter and you have to get more creative. But we've given the counties 11,000 gallons of hand sanitizer, plexiglass barriers to go between people, drop boxes so that people don't have to go into polling places. They can drop their ballots outside. And a lot of it's common sense. The good news is that after 6 or 7 months of dealing with COVID and dealing with masks and gloves and washing hands, people are better suited to interact in that kind of environment. But there's not really a single specific requirement for COVID. It's really left up to local health departments and local counties to decide what they want to do.
Awesome, Chris. So I read this Georgia as a national leader in elections. Why this is called, Chris? Why Georgia is called as a national leader?
Well, because I think we do things that a lot of folks don't do. Georgia has not always had great press when it comes to elections. People talk about, all sorts of issues, But the fact is that in 2016, five years ago, 4 years ago, Georgia was the second state in the country that had automatic voter registration, whereby if anyone went to the Department of Driver Services and got a driver's license or an ID card, they were automatically registered to vote unless they specifically said no. We're the only second state in the country that did that. Georgia has what's called the gold standard of voting access, where we've got 3 weeks of advance voting in person. We've got 45 days of voting by mail, and we've got 12 hours on election day. We've got online voter registration where people can register to vote online in about a minute with a driver's license. We've joined a nationwide cooperative with other states to keep our voter lists accurate, so that if you move from one state to another, the states get notices so that they can keep their list clean. Georgia has done a lot of things that a lot of states don't do. It's interesting. I was talking to, I like telling this story, after the 2018 election, where frankly we got a lot of undeserved bad press. I got a call from the New York State Election Board, and they said, "Hey, we're thinking about experimenting with 6 days of advance voting for our elections." And I said, "Wow, 6 days? That's great." I said, "In Georgia, we have 3 weeks, and we have a required Saturday offer to voting." I said, "If you come down here, you can go to church on Sunday and go vote at the same time and have lunch." And I said, "I'll show you how we do it." There are many other states that are seen to be much more progressive than Georgia that have no advance voting, where you have to have an excuse to get an absentee ballot. I don't think there's a state in the country where it's easier to vote than Georgia. And so I'm happy that people are recognizing that. And when you look at the facts about what we do, you really can't come to a reasonable conclusion other than that we're leading the way in election innovation.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. And one other question. So as a part of this election, do you also travel to county by county for any inspections or so, or how this works?
Not on election day. And again, we've been pretty limited in traveling with COVID. But before COVID, I would go all over the state and meet at regional meetings with groups of county officials. And I would go to some of their training, and I would go to see their offices on election day. And I really enjoyed that. But this year, not so much. They're just not having events like they used to. And I've done a lot of these Zoom meetings and a lot of these Zoom calls, but I've not really gotten out as much as I'd like to.
As a new, for example, if I'm a new voter, can I do registration even today? Or is there any cutoff day?
The cutoff is 30 days before the election. Now, you can still register today or tomorrow or Monday or Tuesday. The problem is you won't be able to vote in the election on Tuesday. You have to be registered 30 days before the election. Now, if you register today, if you're a new voter and you register today, you'd be able to vote in the runoff after this, if there's a runoff for Senate or something like that. So if you miss the registration deadline of October 5th, still you can go online and register today. You can send in an application today and be ready for the next one, because we have lots of elections in Georgia. We have special elections when vacancies open up. And really, once you register one time, as long as you vote, if you voted only once every 4 years in the presidential election, your registration would never go inactive. So get registered and get involved is what I'd say.
How about the last minute voter? For example, any last minute voter who has to travel on an emergency out of the country, still they can avail online services? They
can still register to vote online. And that's why if I got a call today and said, "Hey, you've got to leave the country tomorrow," possibly I could get up and go vote first thing in the morning tomorrow, because there's advance voting. But as you get this close to the election, your options really start to dwindle. If you were to get a notice, a couple of weeks before the election that you had to go out of town, you could request an absentee ballot, and even your absentee ballot could even be mailed overseas to you if you wanted, if you had enough time to make that happen. When you get to this time, you're running out of options.
Chris, this is a very unusual elections in 2020 during the COVID. I would love to hear from you the technology challenges and also the challenges to enable your work, right? So when you were about to travel, it is very easy Now you are doing everything on Zoom. So what are your challenges if I were to ask you during this COVID situation?
Well, the most obvious challenge is we had to get the new voting system installed. The new voting system is similar to the old system in that it's got a tablet and you make your selections on a screen, but now it prints out a ballot and then you take it over and you scan it yourself. Previously, you only had that one machine. You had basically one tablet that did everything. So we not only had to train the poll workers and the county officials how to use it, how to store it, how to transport it, how to set it up, we had to teach the voters how to use it. So we did a lot of demonstrations earlier in the year. We did videos. We did all sorts, as much stuff as we could to get it out there. But the fact is we had over 30,000 new voting machines coming into the state last year and early this year. And all that stuff had to be set up. It had to be acceptance tested by our office. It had to be security checked. It had to be stored. The poll workers had to be trained on how to use it, and the voters had to be trained. In addition to that, many of the poll workers were advanced in age. They're in their 70s and 80s, and that made them, very vulnerable to COVID. So they stopped being poll workers. So we had to get new poll workers to learn to use this new system where you couldn't, in a lot of cases, have hands-on training. So you'd be training somebody how to use a machine over Zoom. And that, while that's better than nothing, it's not the same as putting your hands on a machine and doing it. So that was one of the biggest technology challenges, was just the physical act of getting the stuff here. I think everybody's gotten pretty good at communicating over Zoom and making the most of the situations, and frankly, probably saving a lot of time and money from driving around and sitting down.
Obviously.
Maybe this will be the way to go. But and so we've taken advantage of it too. I do Zoom calls with the entire state, and I do Zoom calls with different regions, and I do Zoom calls with different counties on issues. We do training webinars with our Secretary of State's team. And so, we've done what everybody else has done. We've leveraged technology to make the best of what we've got, and we've been pretty successful.
Awesome. I think really it's really a learning curve in this 2020. The adoption rate, the people are adapting to the digital. It's very awesome. Actually, so far it's flawless. They are able to perform their jobs, whoever is able to access these softwares so far. And a silly question, Chris, so far, did you see any fraud casting of any of the votes so far?
No, nothing that I would say is fraud. Now, there are situations where people make mistakes. I heard of a story just earlier today where an older couple had voted by absentee, but they kept getting all this mail saying, you need to vote, you need to vote, you need to vote. So they were afraid that maybe their vote hadn't counted. So they went in to vote in person and had to be. So if you were to look at the surface, you'd say, well, they're trying to vote twice. Well, no, they weren't trying to vote twice, but they, there's so much. I get probably 4 or 5 text messages a day from different groups who usually get my name wrong, who say, hey, you haven't voted yet, or have you returned your absentee ballot, or make sure you vote for this person or that person. And so voters really get confused, can get confused with that much different stimulation going in. But no, we've not seen, and sometimes you won't see it until after the election, but we've got a full-time investigative team that investigates any kind of claims like that. And we jump on it pretty quickly. So nothing on any large scale. There may be 1s and 2s of problems, but nothing significant.
Good to know, Chris. Thank you. And after the election day, when will the results be published, Chris?
They'll start coming in that night. What I'm hoping and what I'm expecting is that by 1 or 2 o'clock on Wednesday morning, we will have a pretty good idea of what it looks like in Georgia. Counties were able to start scanning the absentee ballots a week ago Monday. And so, there will be, so let's say we end up with 3.5 to 4 million absentee ballots. Hopefully most of those will be scanned by Tuesday night. Wow. A significant portion of them will be scanned. And then to tabulate the election day votes takes very little time because you use memory cards. They're scanned at the polling place. So you upload the memory card. So I think by what's normally considered the end of the night on election night, which is, frankly, usually 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I think we will have nearly, I won't say complete results, but very, very strong indicative reports of what it is. And then for 3 days after that, the counties can still accept that ballots for overseas, and they can, if they're provisional ballots that can be fixed, they can do that for 3 days. So officially, it'll be a couple days, but I think realistically by Wednesday morning, people will have a really good idea of what the status is in Georgia anyway.
How about the nationwide? Can we
That
expect?
that's a little bit harder to tell, because in some states they allow ballots to come in as long as they're postmarked by election day.
Mhm.
So you could have a tight race someplace, and then you could have 3 or 4 days of ballots continue to come in, and it could flip the results. So what I expect to see is that in places where it's very tight, what they will do, and this is a good data that they should have available, is, okay, let's take a state. Let's say Michigan, for example. Let's say Michigan is very, very tight, and one candidate is ahead by 20,000 votes. Well, what they'll be able to tell is how many absentee ballots are still outstanding. And they may say, well, there's still 75,000 absentee ballots, so we know that you could change the result. So we're not, you don't know that it will change the result, but it could change the result. If there's a 25,000 vote lead and there are only 5,000 absentee ballots out, then you know it isn't going to change, even if they all go for one person. But that's going to be the question: is in these states where they allow votes to keep coming in after election day, that's really going to be what's going to tell the story. So it could very well be several days, if not more, before there's a real solid consensus nationally as to what's going to happen.
Thank you, Chris. So with this rate of voting, what do you think will be the percentage of voting after the election day in Georgia? What percentage?
It's a bold prediction, but I'm going to go with about 70 to 75%.
So it's
which is
far better than 2016.
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, yes, much better.
Okay. Yeah, I think last question to you before I close this show, Chris. How is your day looks like during this election days?
Well, they generally start about 1:30 in the morning.
Oh my God!
I get up very, very early, and not because I have to work. So I don't want to say I'm working from 1 o'clock in the morning, but and that means it's getting close to my bedtime now. But I get to the office around 7, and from 7 until usually around close to 6 o'clock, I'm responding to questions from counties. They've got a question about this procedure, that procedure, this law, that law, this crazy situation that came up. Calls from reporters, calls from voters. It really is just it's kind of like being in a pinball machine. You just go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and it makes the day go by very quickly. But at the end, I stop and I'm just exhausted. I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't stopped moving or haven't stopped talking for 13 hours, and then I come home to my lovely family and dog and stuff like that, and but I'm often in bed by about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night.
I can understand. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time. Any final message to the viewers before we close?
No, just thank you for voting. Thank you for being interested in voting. What I said when I was the chief investigator for 8 years was that the best protection against either fraud or having your rights taken away voting is understanding what's supposed to be happening. So I encourage all your listeners to learn, ask questions about the voting system. Go to your county board of elections meetings, ask questions, learn who it is in your county that's actually conducting the elections. You can sign up to be an observer. You can sign up to be a poll worker. You can really get involved, and it really is, the whole election process is basically done by volunteers, basically done by people that sign up, and they technically get paid, so they're not technically volunteers, but they're practically volunteers. So if you want to get involved, I encourage you to call your county and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Wow. I didn't know that entire the staff is volunteers. I didn't
For
know
the
that.
most part, probably on election day, probably about 85% are like I said, they get paid, maybe $10 an hour, so they may make $100 for the day, but they're that's practically volunteers in my book.
Any voluntary certificate, Chris, which is counted?
In some counties they do. Some they calculate that, and some corporate groups have gotten involved, and they're giving their employees the day off if they work in the elections. So that's a neat development too.
Thank you, Chris, for your
All
time.
right.
I know it's a busy day, but giving 30 minutes to Mana TV, it's awesome. And thank you for all your service, what you do. We hope everything is done smoothly and you'll have some rest. Thank you, and
Yes,
have a great day.
I hope so. Well, I tell you what, invite me back on afterwards, and we can dissect what actually happened, and we can compare
Sure.
how accurate my prediction is. But
I'll do that.
it's always a
I'll do
pleasure,
that.
Praveen, and
Thank you.
you can call me anytime.
Thank you. That's all from Insight with Praveen Puram. And thanks to Chris for giving so much insight about the elections. And please do watch.